They had never lost a war, not once in 12,000 years. Their empire stretched across 1,000 star systems like a silver web. Their ships were beautiful things made of living crystal that grew and healed itself. Their admirals were cold and perfect beings who saw war as simple math. Calculate the enemy, calculate the resources, calculate the victory. It was always the same answer. Grand Admiral Prime stood on the bridge of his flagship, the inevitable conclusion. He was tall and thin, with silver skin that seemed to glow in the dim light. His eyes were like pools of mercury, showing no emotion, no doubt, no fear. He had commanded the fleets for 300 years, and in that time he had never known anything but victory. On the before him, a planet burned. They had been a proud species. They were six-limbed amphibians who had built great cities beneath their purple oceans. They had mastered the secrets of living technology, growing their buildings and machines from engineered coral. They had art and music and dreams of reaching the stars. Now they had nothing. Ships filled their sky like a swarm of glittering locusts, beam weapons carved through their cities. Their orbital defenses had fallen in the first hour. Their fleet, such as it was, had been reduced to floating debris within the first day. Now, 3 days later, they were sending their final transmission, a plea for mercy. Prime did not respond. Mercy was not a variable in his calculations. His adjutant, a younger named, approached with a data crystal in his long fingers. He was still new to command, still learning that war was not about glory or honor. It was about efficiency. Grand Admiral said, his voice carrying the flat tone all used. The resistance has ended. Their population centers have been identified for processing. Estimated harvest, 4 billion biological units. Acceptable, Prime replied. He did not look away from the burning world. Log it. Conquest 4,712. Resistance level minimal. Resource expenditure within acceptable parameters. Made the entry in the fleet records, another line in a very long list. They had been doing this for so long that it had become routine. Find a species, evaluate their worth, conquer them, process them, move on to the next. The processing was the part that other species found horrifying. They did not kill their conquered enemies. Death was wasteful. Instead, they took the survivors to vast orbital facilities where they were broken down into useful components. Biological material for fuel, neural tissue for computing, genetic material for storage. Everything had value. Nothing was wasted. It was logical, it was efficient, it was the way. Prime finally turned from the burning planet no longer interested him. It was already in the past, and he was a being who looked only forward. "What is our next target?" he asked. Hesitated. This was unusual, did not hesitate. "There is a matter that requires your attention, Grand Admiral," he said carefully. "Our long-range probes have detected an anomaly in Sector 774, a region of space that does not appear in our databases." "Explain." "We have sent 14 probe units into this region over the past cycle. None have returned. No data transmissions. No distress signals. They simply enter and vanish." Prime felt something stir in the cold depths of his mind. It was not quite curiosity, did not feel curiosity, but it was close. "A natural phenomenon?" he asked. "Unknown, Grand Admiral, but there is more. Before the last probe was lost, it detected energy signatures consistent with spacecraft, multiple vessels, and a star system that our records say should not exist." Now Prime was interested. In 12,000 years of conquest, they had mapped every corner of the galaxy. Every star, every planet, every asteroid was catalogued and evaluated. The idea that something had escaped their notice was almost unthinkable. "Almost." "Show me," he commanded. Activated the holographic display. A map of the local region appeared, showing territory in silver and unconquered space in red. There, at the edge of the display, was a dark spot, a void in their perfect records. The region contains at least one star system, explained, possibly more. Our probes detected 8 planets orbiting a yellow main sequence star. The third planet shows signs of extensive development, cities, industry, a population in the billions. A spacefaring civilization, Prime said. It was not a question. Yes, Grand Admiral, but there is something strange about their world. His voice carried a note of something that might have been unease. Initial readings suggest it is a high-gravity planet. The atmosphere contains dangerous levels of oxygen. The surface temperature varies by extreme degrees. Tectonic activity is constant. Radiation from the star is barely filtered by the magnetic field. Prime processed this information. The description matched a theoretical category in databases, a category that had never been confirmed. He said quietly. Yes, Grand Admiral. If the readings are accurate, sapient life should not be able to evolve on such a planet. The conditions are simply too hostile. For a long moment, Prime said nothing. He stared at the dark spot on the map as if he could see through it to whatever lay beyond. In 12,000 years, they had never encountered a species. Such things were supposed to be myths, stories told by lesser races to frighten their young. But the probes had detected ships, cities, billions of living beings. Something was out there, something that had escaped notice for, something that was destroying their probes without even bothering to send a message. Another admiral might have felt fear. Prime felt only a cold satisfaction. After 4,712 conquests, he had grown bored. Every victory was the same. Every enemy fell the same way. The calculations never changed, and neither did the outcomes. But this was something new, something unknown, something that might finally provide a challenge worthy of his attention. Set course for Sector 774, he commanded. Full fleet deployment, 300 ships. Grand Admiral said carefully, should we not request reinforcements, if this species has been destroying our probes? 300 ships have never failed to achieve victory, Prime interrupted. We have conquered empires with less. Whatever hides in that darkness will kneel before the ascendancy like all the rest. The order went out. 300 crystalline warships turned as one, their engines glowing with cold blue fire. They entered hyperspace in perfect formation, leaving the burning world of the behind. Prime stood alone on his bridge, watching the stars blur into lines of light. Somewhere ahead, a mystery waited, a species that should not exist, a challenge that might finally be worthy of his attention. He had no way of knowing that he was sailing toward the end of everything that had built. No way of knowing that the beings waiting in that unknown region had been watching his empire for centuries, preparing for the day when the conquerors finally came to their door. The humans were waiting. And they were ready. The fleet emerged from hyperspace like a school of silver fish breaking the surface of a dark ocean. 300 ships spread out in perfect formation, their crystal hulls catching the light of an unfamiliar yellow star. Prime stood at the center of his bridge, his mercury eyes scanning the star system lay before him, exactly as the probes had reported. 8 planets orbiting a medium-sized sun, gas giants in the outer reaches, rocky worlds closer in. And there, third from the star, a blue and green sphere wrapped in white clouds. It was beautiful in a wild, chaotic way. Even from this distance, Prime could see the signs of a massive storm system swirling across the surface. Brown patches of desert beside blue expanses of ocean. Green continents that spoke of aggressive plant life fighting for every inch of soil. Scan it, he ordered. The data came back quickly, and his voice carried a note of disbelief as he read the results. Confirming previous probe data, Grand Admiral. The planet has a gravity of 1.2 standard. Atmospheric oxygen content is 21%. Surface temperatures range from -89 degrees to +57 degrees depending on location and season. The magnetic field is unstable. Volcanic activity is constant. The dominant life forms are carbon-based, water-dependent, and remarkably diverse. And the inhabitants, approximately 10 billion on the additional population spread across 47 colony worlds. They call themselves humans, Grand Admiral. They call their planet Earth. Prime processed this information. 47 colony worlds was impressive for any species, but especially for one that had achieved only 3 centuries ago according to intercepted communications. These humans worked fast. "What of their fleet?" he asked. Detecting 42 vessels in defensive formation near the 4th planet. Small ships, Grand Admiral. The largest is perhaps 1/4 the size of our standard cruiser. Their technology appears to be several generations behind ours. Primitive fusion drives, basic energy shields, kinetic and explosive weapons. A murmur passed through the bridge crew. 42 ships against 300. Primitive technology against crystal tech. This would not be a battle, it would be an execution. "Open a channel," Prime commanded. Standard ultimatum. The transmission went out across all frequencies. The same message that had sent to 4,712 civilizations before. Surrender your worlds. Surrender your resources. Surrender your population for processing. Resistance will result in total extinction. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then a response crackled through the communication system. A single voice, speaking in a language the translation systems had never encountered but quickly decoded. "This is Admiral Helena of the Terran Defense Coalition. You have entered Sol system space without authorization. I'm going to need you to turn your ships around and go back the way you came." Actually laughed. It was a strange sound, one that rarely made. "They threaten us, with 40 ships against 300. But Prime did not laugh. Something about the human's voice bothered him. There was no fear in it, no desperation, no pleading. The admirals of 4,712 conquered civilizations had spoken to him before battle. They had begged, they had threatened, they had bargained. This admiral sounded almost bored, as if the fleet was merely an inconvenience in her schedule. "Run a full analysis," he ordered. "I want to know everything about these humans, biology, psychology, military capability, everything." The data took several minutes to compile. When it appeared on the Prime felt something he had not experienced in 300 years. Uncertainty. The humans were monsters. Not in appearance, they looked fragile enough. Soft skin, exposed organs, no natural weapons to speak of. A child could kill an unarmored human with ease. But the data told a different story. Humans could survive injuries that would kill any known species. They could lose limbs and continue fighting. They could function with damaged organs. Their bodies healed at an impossible rate, knitting broken bones and growing new tissue without medical intervention. They were omnivores who could digest almost any organic matter. They could survive without water for days, without food for weeks. They could function in temperature ranges that would kill in minutes. And their history, their terrible, bloody history. They had been keeping records for 12,000 years. In all that time, they had never fought a war among themselves. War was for conquering lesser species. The idea of fighting your own kind was inefficient, wasteful, illogical. Humans had been fighting each other since they first learned to pick up rocks. They had developed weapons not to conquer the stars, but to kill each other more efficiently. They had created nuclear weapons capable of destroying their entire planet, and then they had built more of them. They had killed hundreds of millions of their own species in conflicts over resources, ideology, and imaginary lines on maps. They were insane, completely, absolutely insane. And yet they had not destroyed themselves. Every time they approached extinction, they pulled back, they rebuilt, they adapted, they grew stronger. Grand Admiral said, his voice now uncertain, "The human fleet is moving." Prime looked at the tactical display. The 42 human ships were not retreating. They were not holding position. They were advancing, directly toward the fleet. "Hold formation," he ordered. "Let them come to us. When they enter optimal firing range, destroy them." The human ships came on. They were ugly things, blocky and utilitarian, painted in dark colors that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. They moved with a speed that surprised Prime. Their primitive engines should not have been capable of such acceleration. At 100,000 kilometers, they opened fire. Crystal beam weapons sliced through space, each one capable of cutting a lesser ship in half. The humans did not try to dodge. They flew straight into the barrage, their shields flashing with impacts. Some of them died. 4 human ships exploded in the first volley, their crews vaporized in an instant, but the others kept coming. At 50,000 kilometers, they fired again. 6 more human ships died. At 20,000 kilometers, something impossible happened. The lead human ship, a battered vessel trailing smoke and fire, accelerated to a speed that should have killed everyone aboard. It covered the distance between the fleets in seconds, and instead of firing its weapons, it drove itself directly into the side of a cruiser. The crystalline hull shattered, atmosphere vented into space, and from the wreckage of the human ship, figures emerged. Human soldiers in armored suits, moving through the vacuum, climbing into the dying ship through the hole their vessel had made. "They're boarding us," whispered. "Grand Admiral, they're boarding us." Across the fleet, it was happening everywhere. Human ships were ramming vessels, sacrificing themselves to create entry points. Human soldiers were pouring through the breaches, fighting their way through corridors that should have been death traps. The crew members tried to resist. They were not warriors, but they had weapons. They fired at the invaders. They set traps. They vented compartments into space. Nothing worked. The humans did not fight like any species they had encountered. They did not form ranks or follow predictable patterns. Each soldier seemed to operate independently while somehow coordinating perfectly with the others. They adapted to every tactic within minutes. They found weaknesses they did not know existed. And they did not stop, even when wounded, even when their armor was breached, even when they should have been dead. Prime watched the tactical display as ship after ship went dark. Not destroyed, captured. The humans were taking his fleet. "All ships retreat," he ordered. The words felt like broken glass in his mouth. "Fall back to hyperspace immediately." The fleet turned and ran. 300 ships had entered the system. 212 made it out. Behind them, Admiral Helena watched the fleeing enemy on her. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Track them," she ordered. "Find there and send a message to Earth. Tell them the war has begun." The High Council had not gathered in emergency session for 6,000 years. The last time had been during a reactor failure that threatened to destroy there. That crisis had been solved in hours through careful calculation and precise engineering. This crisis could not be calculated. This crisis did not follow logic. Prime stood before the 13 ruling intellects of the Ascendancy. The council chamber was a vast dome of living crystal that had grown over, its walls pulsing with soft light. The councilors sat in elevated positions, their silver faces turned down toward the defeated admiral like judges presiding over a criminal. "Explain," Counselor 1 commanded. Her voice was ice. "Explain how 300 ships failed to defeat 40. Prime had rehearsed his answer during the long journey home. He had prepared data charts and tactical analyses. He had calculated probabilities and reviewed every moment of the battle. None of it felt adequate. "The humans do not fight like any species we have encountered," he began. "They do not follow predictable patterns. They do not preserve their own lives when victory requires sacrifice. They adapt faster than our tactical systems can compensate." "They are primitives," Counselor 3 interrupted. Their technology is generations behind ours. Their numbers are insignificant. How can they possibly pose a threat to the Ascendancy? Prime activated the holographic display. Images filled the chamber. Human soldiers cutting through crystal armor with tools they had improvised on the battlefield. Human pilots flying patterns that should have torn their ships apart from gravitational stress. Human commanders making decisions in microseconds that would take tactical systems minutes to calculate. Technology is not the only factor in war, he said. The humans were born on a. Every generation of their species has been a fight for survival. They have been at war since before they learned to walk upright. War is not something they do. It is something they are. He showed them the biological data. Human endurance that allowed them to fight for days without rest. Human pain tolerance that let them function with wounds that would incapacitate any other species. Human adrenaline responses that gave them temporary strength and speed beyond normal limits. They evolved to survive the unsurvivable, Prime continued. Their bodies are designed to absorb damage and keep functioning. Their minds are designed to find solutions under impossible pressure. They do not calculate victory. They refuse to accept defeat. The council chamber was silent. For the first time in 12,000 years, they were facing something they did not understand. Counselor 9 leaned forward. What do they want? We intercepted a transmission after our retreat, Prime replied. They know about the processing centers. They know what we do to conquered species, and they are coming to stop us. Let them come, one said coldly. We will gather the full might of the Ascendancy, 10,000 ships, 1,000,000 automated weapons platforms. We will destroy their and their colonies and every last member of their insane species. With respect, Counselor, I do not believe that will be possible. The words hung in the air like poison. No had ever suggested that victory was impossible. The very concept was foreign to their way of thinking. Explain, one demanded again. In the 3 days since our retreat, human ships have been detected in 17 star systems. Not scouting parties, full battle groups. They are not waiting for us to attack. They are coming for us. He changed the display. Red dots appeared across the map of territory, spreading like a disease. They have freed the processing center. The survivors are already being evacuated. They have made contact with the remnant and the silicon hive mines we conquered 2,000 years ago. Former enemies are providing them with intelligence about our defenses, our supply lines, our weaknesses. Impossible, 3 said. Those species were broken. They have no capability to resist. They did not resist. They simply waited, and now the humans have given them hope. The council erupted into argument. Some called for immediate counterattack. Others demanded defensive fortification. A few suggested negotiation, though no one knew what they could offer that humans would accept. In the midst of the chaos, an alert flashed across the chamber's systems. An incoming transmission, unencrypted, broadcasting across all frequencies. The holographic display changed to show a human face, a woman with dark skin and silver-streaked hair. Her eyes held the steady calm of someone who had made peace with death long ago. I am ambassador of the Terran Coalition, she said. I have a message for the Ascendancy. The council fell silent. Every silver face turned to the display. We have studied your empire, the ambassador continued. 4,712 civilizations, trillions of sentient beings processed into fuel and components, species wiped from existence because they had resources you wanted. Her voice did not rise. She did not shout or threaten. She simply stated facts as if she were reading a weather report. Here is what will happen now. You will release all surviving prisoners from your processing centers. You will return the worlds you have conquered to their original inhabitants. You will dismantle your military infrastructure and submit to oversight by a coalition of liberated species. Counselor 1 laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. And if we refuse? Ambassador smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. If you refuse, we will come for you. Not your fleets, not your colonies. You, the 13 members of this council, the admirals who carried out your orders, the engineers who designed your processing facilities, every individual who participated in genocide. She leaned closer to the camera, her dark eyes filling the display. We are very good at finding people who think they can hide behind armies and walls. We have been doing it for thousands of years. Your empire is large, but we are patient, and we do not forgive. The transmission ended. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Counselor One turned to Prime. Destroy them, she ordered. Gather every ship, activate every weapon. I want their worlds burned to ash and their species erased from existence. Prime nodded slowly. He did not believe it would work. The humans had already proven themselves beyond calculation, but he followed orders. It will be done, he said. He did not know that even as he spoke, human soldiers were already landing on colony worlds. They came not as conquerors, but as liberators. They freed processing center prisoners and armed them with captured weapons. They taught former slaves to fight back against their masters. The war had barely begun, and already they were losing. They just did not know it yet. The war lasted 18 months. In that time, everything they had built over 12,000 years came crashing down. It did not happen all at once. They were still powerful. Their fleets still numbered in the thousands. Their automated defense systems still guarded 1,000 worlds. But power means nothing when you do not know how to use it. The humans did not fight like they expected. They did not gather their forces for massive fleet battles. They did not target strategic installations or supply lines. Instead, they attacked everywhere at once, appearing from nowhere, striking hard and vanishing before they could respond. They called it guerrilla warfare. They had no word for it. On the ocean world of Prime, human submarines worked alongside the surviving gas dwellers to destroy underwater mining facilities. They had lived as slaves for 8,000 years. Now they rose from the depths with ancient weapons and new allies, reclaiming the world their ancestors had lost. In the asteroid fields of the Silicon Hive Mine territory, human hackers coordinated with digital intelligences to corrupt computer systems. Security protocols that had been unbreakable for suddenly failed. Defense platforms turned against their masters. Factory systems began producing weapons for the rebellion instead of parts for the empire. And on world after world, the prisoners walked free. The processing centers were the first targets. Human special forces teams dropped from orbit in small pods, landing directly on the massive orbital facilities where billions of sentient beings waited to be converted into fuel. They fought their way through guards who had never faced real resistance. They broke open holding cells and handed out weapons to anyone who could hold them. The freed prisoners did not need much encouragement. Many had watched their families die on the processing lines. Many had spent years waiting for their turn, knowing exactly what awaited them. When the humans offered them a chance to fight back, they took it. A female named had been a scientist before her world fell. She had spent 3 years in a holding cell, listening to the screams of her people as they were processed in the chambers next door. When human soldiers broke down her cell door, she did not cry or thank them. She simply asked for a weapon. Within a week, she was leading a battalion of liberated prisoners against ground forces. Within a month, she had reclaimed her capital city. Within 6 months, she was one of the most feared commanders in the Liberation Army. The humans taught us something important, she said in an intercepted transmission. They taught us that fear only has power if you let it. They made us afraid for so long that we forgot we had a choice. Now we remember. Prime watched the reports come in from every corner of the Ascendancy. Defeat after defeat. Retreat after retreat. His own fleet had been reduced to less than 100 ships. constantly running from human battle groups that seemed to be everywhere at once. "How do they do it?" he asked one night as their flagship hid in the shadow of a dead moon. "We have more ships, we have better technology, our soldiers are trained from birth to follow orders. How are we losing?" Had changed in the months since the war began. The young adjutant who had laughed at human threats now wore the hollow look of someone who had seen too much death. "They are not like us," he said quietly. "We calculate, we plan, we follow protocols. Everything we do is based on logic and efficiency. And they do not. No, they improvise, they adapt. They do things that make no logical sense, and somehow those things work." Paused. "Yesterday I watched a human pilot fly her damaged ship directly into our formation. She had lost propulsion on one side. Her weapons were offline. By any calculation she should have retreated. What did she do? She used her remaining engine to spin her ship in a spiral, turning herself into a projectile. She destroyed 3 of our cruisers before her reactor overloaded." His voice was barely above a whisper. "She was singing. We intercepted her final transmission. She was singing a song from her as she died." Prime did not know what to say to that. The idea of facing death with joy was alien to everything he understood. "There is something else," continued. "Something I have noticed in the human communications we have intercepted. They do not fight because they hate us. They fight because they believe in something." "Believe in what?" "The idea that all sentient beings have value, that no species has the right to destroy another, that the strong should protect the weak instead of consuming them." Looked at his commander with something like wonder in his mercury eyes. "They are not trying to conquer us, Grand Admiral. They are trying to save us." Prime thought about that for a long time. Meanwhile, the war continued. The Ancient, a species that had surrendered their 1,000-world empire without a fight 12,000 years ago, suddenly revealed weapons they had hidden all that time. They had been waiting, planning, preparing for the day when someone would challenge the humans gave them that chance. They brought ships that moved through dimensions they could not detect. They brought weapons that ignored shields and armor. They brought warriors who had trained in secret for generations, passing down the arts of war from parent to child in hidden temples. They had thought the broken and harmless. They were wrong. Within a year, the liberation forces had reclaimed half of territory. Processing centers burned across the galaxy. Former slaves stood on the rubble of their chains and shouted their freedom to the stars. And through it all, the humans led the way. They took the heaviest casualties. They volunteered for the most dangerous missions. They died in numbers that would have broken any other species. But for every human who fell, 10 seemed to take their place. They came from Earth and from dozens of colony worlds. They came as soldiers and medics and engineers and pilots. They came because they believed that what they had done was wrong and that someone had to stop it. Admiral Helena stood on the bridge of her flagship as her fleet approached She had lost count of the battles. She had lost friends and colleagues and people she loved, but she had never lost sight of why she was fighting. "Send them our terms one more time," she ordered. "Tell them this is their last chance to surrender peacefully." The transmission went out. For a long moment there was no response. Then the defensive platforms opened fire. Smiled sadly. She had hoped it would not come to this, but she had planned for it. "All ships," she said calmly, "begin the final assault." The battle for the lasted 3 days. They threw everything they had at the human advance. Defense platforms that had guarded the system for 10,000 years opened fire with weapons that could crack planets. Automated drones swarmed in clouds of billions. The last ships of the fleet formed a desperate line between the invaders and their world. None of it was enough. Human ships pushed through the defensive fire with the same stubborn determination they had shown throughout the war. They took losses. They watched friends die in nuclear fire. They kept coming. They provided underwater support. their bioships adapted for space combat through months of human engineering assistance. The silicon hive minds cracked every security protocol, turning weapons against their masters. The dimension ships appeared inside the defensive perimeter, bypassing the outer lines entirely. And leading them all, the freed prisoners of 1,000 processing centers fought with the fury of those who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Prime watched from his crippled flagship as the defensive line collapsed. Around him, the bridge was dark and damaged. Most of his crew were dead, lay unconscious in a corner, wounded by shrapnel but still breathing. The Grand Admiral had never imagined it would end like this. In 12,000 years, no enemy had ever reached there. The idea that someone could defeat the Ascendancy had been literally unthinkable. Now he watched human descending through the atmosphere, their heat shields glowing orange against the purple sky. Grand Admiral, a voice crackled through the damaged communication system. This is Admiral. I am offering you the opportunity to surrender personally. The war is over. Your fleet is destroyed. Your council has been captured. There is no reason for more of your people to die. Prime looked at the tactical display. The numbers were clear. The humans had won. Fighting on would only mean more death for a battle that was already lost. For the first time in his 300 years, he made a decision based on something other than calculation. I accept, he said. Where do you want me? 1 hour later, Prime stood on the steps of the High Council chamber. The crystal spires of the capital city rose around him, undamaged. The humans had been careful to avoid civilian casualties wherever possible. Even in victory, they showed restraint. Admiral Helena walked toward him across the plaza. She was smaller than he had expected. Her uniform was stained and torn from battle. There were dark circles under her eyes from days without sleep. But she moved with the steady confidence of someone who had accomplished what she set out to do. Behind her came representatives of every species they had conquered, and dozens of others. They walked as equals now, not as slaves or prisoners. Was among them. The scientist-turned-warrior stood with her arms crossed, watching Prime with eyes that had seen too much horror to ever fully forgive. Grand Admiral Prime said formally, on behalf of the Terran Coalition and the Alliance of Liberated Worlds, I accept your surrender. Prime inclined his head. You have won. What happens now? He expected the answer he would have given in her position. Execution, processing, the destruction of his species as they had destroyed so many others. It was logical, it was efficient, it was what they deserved. Surprised him. Now we rebuild, she said simply. Your people have knowledge and skills that can help repair the damage you caused. Your ships can be converted to transport survivors back to there. Your processing centers can be transformed into hospitals and schools. You would let us live. Prime could not keep the shock from his voice. After everything we have done. That's what separates us from you. Met his Mercury eyes with her dark ones. We didn't come here to conquer. We didn't come here for revenge. We came because what you were doing was wrong and someone had to stop it. She reached out her hand. In human culture, Prime had learned, this was a gesture of peace and partnership. The war is over, she continued. But the work is just beginning. There are trillions of survivors who need help, worlds that need to be restored, species that need to find their way back from the edge of extinction. You can be part of that, or you can spend the rest of your existence in a cell. The choice is yours. Prime looked at her hand for a long moment. Behind, the representatives of the liberated species watched in silence. Many of them wanted him dead. He could see it in their eyes. They had earned that hatred. But the human was offering something else, something they had never offered to anyone. A chance. Slowly, carefully, he took her hand. In the years that followed, the galaxy transformed. The Ascendancy became the Protectorate. Their calculating minds, once used for conquest, were turned toward logistics and reconstruction. They tracked refugee populations and coordinated relief supplies. They designed new habitats for species whose had been destroyed. Prime himself became an advocate for reconciliation. He traveled from world to world, facing the survivors of conquest, accepting their anger and their grief. He could not undo what had been done, but he could work to ensure it never happened again. Ambassador led the newly formed Galactic Council, a body where every species had equal voice. For the first time in history, beings who had once been masters and slaves sat at the same table, making decisions together. Founded a network of memorial sites across former territory. Each one preserved the memory of what had been lost and celebrated the courage of those who had fought for freedom. Human and children visited these sites together, learning about a dark time that had ended before they were born. And on Earth, monuments rose to honor those who had given their lives in the Liberation War. The names were inscribed in stone and crystal and light. Soldiers and pilots and medics and engineers. Humans who had traveled across the galaxy to fight for strangers because they believed all sentient life had value. Admiral Helena lived long enough to see the first generation of post-war children grow up in a galaxy at peace. She retired to a small house on the coast of what had once been called the Mediterranean Sea. Sometimes young officers would visit her, asking for wisdom about leadership and duty. She always told them the same thing. Strength isn't about being able to destroy your enemies. Any fool can destroy. Real strength is being able to build something better, to look at beings who have done terrible things and see the possibility of change, to offer a hand instead of a weapon. She would pause then, looking out at the blue water that stretched to the horizon. We went to the stars because we wanted to find wonders. We found horror instead, but we also found friends we never expected, species we saved who became our allies, enemies who became partners. The universe isn't kind. It doesn't care about us, but we can care about each other. She smiled, her weathered face creasing with memories of battles and triumphs and losses. That's what being human means, not the biology, not the choice to reach out instead of push away, to protect instead of conquer, to believe that tomorrow can be better than today. Far across the galaxy, on what had once been the Prime received word of her death. He stood in silence for a long moment, processing the information. Then he did something that would have been unthinkable to the being he had once been. He mourned. The enemy who had defeated him had become the teacher who had saved him. The human who had broken his empire had shown him what true strength looked like. And though their species were different in almost every way, they had found common ground. The universe was vast and cold and uncaring, but against that darkness, beings of conscience had found each other. They had built something worth protecting. And the light they created would burn for 10,000 years.